Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal podcast. Our guest today is Zac Engler. Zac is an AI consultant, speaker, and founder of BODHI AI, where he helps businesses integrate AI agents and automation to drive scalable growth and operational efficiency. Zac, thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Absolutely, Krish. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to
Oh,
chat.
my pleasure. Yeah, before we get started, if you could just, I even socialize the topic for the day with the audience, if you could just give a brief introduction about yourself and your company, that'd be great, and then we can get into the topic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, when it comes to me, I've had a deep-seated passion for AI for over a decade now. But most of my career has actually been focused on the HR side of business. So doing training and development, talent acquisition. And throughout my career, I've always been kind of curious about how do you find sustainable, tangible ways, like real world application of theory, and bring that into the workplace so that you can truly bring best practices into everyday activities and actions. Um, and push the envelopes to a certain degree with how work gets done in a fun way, along with an effective way. That being said, I've spent time working for companies like Apple and Amplifone. They're the world's largest provider of hearing care. But later on in my career, I got into working for robotics companies. Par Systems here in Minnesota is an industrial automation company that I went to work for, doing talent acquisition, and then I was recruited into my most recent company, which was Sanctuary AI, based out of Vancouver. Sanctuary is developing one of the world's first humanoid robots with human-like intelligence. So there I was building out the team. We grew from 50 to 175 people during my time there. And I was having to recruit, PhDs in reinforcement learning, roboticists, manufacturing engineers. And I really got, a deep lesson in how AI works at a fundamental level. I thought I knew about AI going into that business and got a whole new level of education from the team out there, which was fantastic. And during my time at Sanctuary, which you're probably well familiar with, ChatGPT came onto the scene in 2023, and I started playing around with it and using it along with everybody else at the company to a degree. And I started seeing all these unique ways that you could fold it into your daily workflows from an like office administration perspective, as well as a team perspective. So I started messing around with it, and I talked to the CEO about, hey, I have some ideas about how we could streamline our operations and make people, more effective to a degree by using these tools and resources. And after a few case studies and pilot programs, we rolled out this transcription tool that sat on everybody's interviews, allowed the interview to be captured, which is like passe now. It's like old hat.
Mhm.
Everybody's got a transcription tool, but at the time it was pretty cutting edge, and got a lot of people's attention. But what the reason we did that was ultimately all of our engineers that were involved in these interviews were spending 45 minutes to an hour, like documenting their coding interviews afterwards and having to copy paste everything into the applicant tracking system. And with this new tool, all of that was gone. And they went from 45 minutes to 15 minutes. And so, that's a half hour back of engineering time, which at a startup is super crucial, for you to maintain that productivity velocity. From there, I was like, hey, this isn't the only place that's in need of tools and services like that. And so that's kind of how BODHI AI was founded, as I saw this opportunity to not only bring these tools out to other companies, but then train them on the most effective ways possible to fold this into your business. And as you start to realize these productivity gains, look for new opportunities for your employees to focus on the more human elements of what you're trying to do, so that you don't have to look at it from a perspective of, we're going to save costs by reducing the amount of work being done and then reducing our headcount. Instead, it's we're going to look to the future of how we're going to grow, how we're going to scale, and how we're going to reconfigure the people that are already at our organization to take on those new challenges using these AI tools. So it's been a really fun career journey. It's been an eye-opening experience. if you can't tell, it's something I'm just naturally excited about. It's like I have my family and AI, and it's like those are kind of the core elements of my life right now. So that's a little bit about me and how I kicked off BODHI AI.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was very good. We got a good idea what you've done in the past and what your company does. So I think without further ado, we'll jump right into the topic, and we'll include the links to the company and your profile on on when you publish the podcast, so folks can certainly will check that out and reach out to you as well. So the topic, I just asked you before we sort of hit record here. I think what you said was as good as any that I could have come up with, which is making AI work for you as opposed to you working for it. Uh, what does it mean? In other words, let me start off here, right? You mentioned repetitive tasks, things that we don't, and you also two things that I want to take from what you had said earlier. One is what you do repetitively as an engineer, as a developer, or as anybody else in the team, and two, how much time you got back by using these tools that are available today, right? You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
a half hour back during any given day is plenty of time. So can you talk a little bit to that? In other words, can you give us an example of a task? You gave one example already, maybe another one where it was a bit repetitive and there's no value add today with humans or Homo sapiens doing that. And there should be a bot or a machine or something else that should actually be doing it, AI, for instance. What could be an example? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. No human was born to export files from a database and import them into another CRM or ERP system, right? Like that's just not something we were made to do. And so I think Greg Eisenberg said it best when he said, any area of your workflow where there's an export button is an opportunity for automation, right? Because there's something being done there where you're taking a digital piece of information and exporting it and sending it to some other digital venue. And so for me, that tends to be like spreadsheets for like my actual business. I try to utilize whatever it is I'm training companies on or selling companies in terms of workflows. And so that could be anything from transcriptions of a meeting and then turning that into a presentation or turning that into social media content. That could be data from spreadsheets and using that to then inform like my scheduling for the upcoming week, if that's the information being conveyed, or using AI to then actually crunch those numbers and help me figure out, are there any unforeseen circumstances that might arise as a result of this data? Are there any unforeseen patterns that I'm not picking up on? It's really good at those types of academic hurdles. And so that for me has been one of those areas. But in a general practice, I think helping office teams figure out like what are those mundane tasks that you have a team of people doing that could be automated so they can get back to focusing on the human effort. And I think another really good example is like sales teams, right? How many salespeople do you know that hate Salesforce because they have a completely organic conversation with their lead or their client, and then they have to go take all their handwritten notes, type them into a computer, and then upload them to Salesforce, track them, log them, and then revisit them in the future. Now with modern transcription tools and AI, you can just plop down a phone and hit record. The AI will transcribe the entire call and then upload that to your CRM system after the meeting's over automatically, allowing you to focus on the person in front of you, right? Same with interviews if you're doing hiring,
So those are great examples. What I'm going to ask you next is, let's say, what is a methodical way? In other words, the thing that you've mentioned more than once already in the first few minutes of our conversation here, Zach, is anything that is repetitive that you shouldn't have to be doing, that a human does not need to do, is a perfect candidate for AI to do it. I have a two-part question here. One is, even before the advent of AI, there was a lot of work that has generally been repetitive, and it's not like that could not have been automated, right? It's not like, oh, you know what, until there was AI and these LLMs and all of these models came into being in the last 6 months, a year or 2 years, if you will. It's not like we could not do it, but that doesn't mean
Hmm.
it was done. So what I
Yeah.
want to understand is, what precluded us from doing it earlier that is not going to be the case anymore? Is it the ease of being able to adapt or incorporate these AI tools into the mix of things, or are there other factors that actually prevented us as people from automating things that we could have generally automated over these years?
You just asked one of my favorite questions, honestly, because this is like the crux of my business. Is I'm not a software developer. I am not a programmer by any means. But in the last 6 months, I've created a handful of websites. I've created more than a handful of automated workflows that I would have never been able to do without generative AI. And I think that's the key element of your point of, yes, there's a lot of repetitive tasks that could have been automated in the past, but you would need a team of software engineers. You would need a team of data analysts. You would need to understand all of the components that go into making that process secure, safe, and repeatable in a digital system. And all of that work takes time, money, and effort that most organizations don't have. They'd rather just continue forward with the status quo because it works, right? They don't want to mess around with the iterative process. Whereas now, when you have generative tools like Bolt or Lovable or Cursor, where you can go in and whip up some pretty amazing web apps in a matter of seconds with a prompt, now all of a sudden you've got not just an individual who can take action on these things, but it doesn't have to be a technical individual. It can literally be anybody at your organization that speaks English and takes the time to figure out how to operate the system, which for most people is anywhere from an hour or two to maybe a half day at most.
Okay, so one reason you mentioned that is because you needed a technical person to do most of what some of this needed in the past, and that could have been a blocker of some sort, meaning you have to hire somebody, maybe it costs a lot of money, and a lot of these other factors. And now you're saying, you know what, even if that person is not a technical person, not a developer, they are still able to accomplish those tasks because of AI and how easy it has generally become, right? Perfect. Is that the only reason, or are there other reasons that things were not automated or made as efficient in the past?
I go back to security as like my default answer for a lot of stuff. That is a reason why people don't do maybe or maybe don't experiment with how they could improve their business processes, right? So whether that security could mean that you're opening your organization up to new vectors of attack, right? By signing up for a new cloud platform, now you've got a new entry point to your your organization's information, and that's just too much of a risk to bear. Or perhaps you're exploring new software tools that you're having to load onto your system. Again, you're opening yourself up to new vulnerabilities. And then of course there's just the time and effort that goes into all of that. Do you have a team of people that can understand what are the risks of this new task or this new software or this new integration that you're going to bring on board, and weigh the ROI of trying it out and seeing if it'll work, or just like I said before, continuing on the status quo and keeping with what you've already done because it works, it's safe, and it's going to keep working for the foreseeable future. The caveat that I'll throw out there to all of this is that we're now entering an era of exponential change. And so while that status quo mentality might have worked in the past, pretty soon, I've been sharing with my clients, in the next 18 months, all of the smart organizations that are out there are going to try agentic AI workflows or agent-based AI systems. And they're not going to work at first, but that's okay, because over time they're going to iterate and they are going to figure out how to make them work first in small portions of their business and then in larger portions of their business. And as those agents take hold and as those agents get more effective and as the models that back those agents improve, they're just going to get better and better. And they're not going to need breaks. They're not going to need vacation. They're not going to need time away from work. And every business that adopts those structures is just going to continue to accelerate at this exponential rate. And after the next 18 months, all of those agents that were put in place now will be at a completely different level of performance than the average human worker, let's say, for example. So that's kind of the race that we're entering into, that I don't think a lot of the kind of industrial age status quo organizations are used to just saying like, well, all that new shiny technology is great. We'll wait till it gets figured out. Somebody else can take care of that, because what's going to happen is somebody in your vertical is going to try it out. They're going to figure it out. And while you're racing to catch up in 2 years, they're going to be running circles around you.
Those are fantastic points. And also, one of the reasons I asked that question as to what else precluded some of us from automating tasks that could have been automated with or without AI was, here's the reason. Like, there are different companies. I've worked, I'm sure you've done too, companies of all different sizes, and a set of teams that are very different from each other. And what I mean by that is, not to say that larger organizations are slower than smaller ones, but just in my experience, when you're like, we are a startup, right? We are a fairly small startup. And when you have few people and you have to do a lot of things, you find ways to doing those same things. You take the effort to finding efficient ways of doing that, because you have no other choice, right? You don't have enough people to doing that. So you have to come up with, I know, engineers or smarter ways of accomplishing, solving that problem. I'm not saying the larger organizations don't have that need, but I have to believe that the need is not maybe necessarily as pressing, because there is that other person, or you have the extra dollar to get something done. So given that, and if you agree that that makes sense to some extent, what is the impact of these tools on smaller organizations as compared to larger organizations? In other words, do you see the smaller firms or startups adopt faster and have to sort of learn these tools, be it the LLMs, be it agentic AI or AI agents? Do you see that they have this need to learn things quicker and making things work using these new tools, compared to a mid-size or a larger organization where they may they still have to do it incrementally, but perhaps they don't have all of those teams work on it. In other words, all that I'm trying to ask in a long-winded, verbose manner is, if you're a small company, does it mean every single person has to sort of learn these tools as quickly as possible, compared to a larger organization where you can isolate certain teams and have them come up to speed with the tools? And once they've made significant or decent amount of progress, then they socialize those tools and the efficiency that those tools brought to the rest of the teams. How do you see this pan out, and does it make a difference between based on the size of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually, one of my favorite sayings is the llama does not fear the piranha, right? The llama fears many piranhas. And if you're one of the larger organizations that's out there right now, as the llama, let's say, one or two small businesses adopting some AI tools and maybe eating into some of your margins probably isn't going to make a world of difference. But that's the thing, that's the trick of these tools, is that pretty soon they're so easy to access, they're so easy to learn, that many small businesses will quickly adopt these tools. And now all of a sudden you have a swarm of piranhas coming after different aspects and different elements of either your vertical or your specific business model, because it's much more efficient for a small business to tackle one very narrow vertical or one very narrow element of a business, and then expand from there, rather than the other way around, right? And I think anybody that, or any large firms that have carved out their space over the last 20 years, now have to think differently about how they're going to assess what are the different verticals that we're playing in, and should we narrow our focus, or if you're a small startup, what are those big chunks that have been proven in the marketplace to be successful, businesses that you can now cut a slice out of and go after a very specific narrow niche. One good example of this is a company I'm working with called AI Roofing Revolution. They're literally focused on just roofing industry and specifically roofing contractors as their niche for focus. Another client of mine does marketing for HVAC companies and only HVAC, and so it's like, playing in that very narrow lane will give you an advantage to move quickly and focus on a target market and take on areas that maybe larger companies have had a benefit in the past. But I would say there is a way for large companies to get into this new mindset of trial and error, iteration through trying out these new tools. And usually that comes from creating a team of champions across the multiple departments that you have, a team of AI champions, so that every department, whether it's marketing, finance, accounting, operations, business development, product development, can have at least one person who understands where these tools are going, how they're developing, how they're impacting the business, how they could benefit the organization, trying them out, cultivating the ideas, creating a plan, and bringing those to fruition for the organization, and then disseminating that to the relevant teams, right? Now that sounds like a lot of work, and it definitely is, because that's going to be a huge area that a lot of companies just the organization and orchestration of that is going to be a big challenge. But better to get started now and at least have a plan for the next 2 years than get 2 years down the road and be racing to catch up, or watching all of your margins, market share, and customers get eaten away by the piranhas.
You make some great points, Zach. One of the things I want to ask based on what you just said there is, let's say if you're a startup and you didn't have a lot of money, maybe you're bootstrap funded, or maybe you have some funding, not a whole lot of money, or not a lot of people. 2 years ago, that could have been sort of a bummer, right? I mean, it's a Debbie Downer or whatever the right word is, because you couldn't get started. A lot of the teams could not get started because they felt like they didn't have the necessary amount of money or the people doing it. Is it fair to then say, Zach, based on what you just mentioned there, with all of these tools, you don't need too many people anymore, or you don't need as many people as you've needed in the past, or as much money as you've needed in the past? Not to say that all of this is cheap, but it's relatively more inexpensive, I want to say, compared to hiring humans to doing a lot of this work. So does that mean, from if you're a large organization, going with your example there, you're now also a little bit worried because of your size, you had so much money, and people, you're like, what, we are protected, nobody can come after us or compete with us because there's a lot of barriers to entry. But with these tools becoming more accessible to a lot of people, a lot of small companies as well, does that mean more, you expect there to be more entrepreneurs, more founders, more creators in the next year or two?
Yeah. Yes, actually, and I'm working on a stealth startup that's actually has that mission of creating 1 million new entrepreneurs, and this idea that regardless of what you've done in the past, and regardless of what your background is, if you're taking the time to learn how to use these tools, they're going to help you build your business plan. They're going to help you tackle areas with low overhead. Because think about it, like you literally have the world's smartest entity ever at your fingertips 24/7. It's just a couple keystrokes away for you to start interacting with, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever model you want to choose is kind of irrelevant at this point. But that idea that you now have access to knowledge, the cost of knowledge is trending to zero, is something that's never happened before, right? And so if that's an opportunity for entrepreneurs, that doesn't mean it's not an opportunity for intrapreneurs as well. It's just getting a company adjusted to that mindset of entrepreneurial thought leadership from within the company, that'll allow you to then create kind of those new moats that you're going to need to stave off new entrants to your market, or perhaps pursue and explore new products and services that would complement your existing offerings, if that makes sense.
It does, fair enough, right? And if we took a spectrum where at one end you have companies like, let's say at Snowpal, we have existing products that are in production. We build APIs, and that's one of the things we do, where we publish these APIs on different platforms, say AWS Marketplace, for other businesses to consume. But we've taken a step back. We have like 8 APIs in production as we speak. When we started creating the ninth one, Zach, we actually paused for a little bit, because we did not want to build it the way we've built the ones in the past, even in terms of the whole approach and methodology and processes internally, right? Forget what is published eventually, but even the whole approach to building software, we were like, what, let's digest what's happening for a moment and build it differently, that is in context with what's happening out there. So we just don't continue doing what we've done in the past. As useful as it is, we have to still change gears, make adjustments and accommodations, much like everybody else out there in the world. But that's a conscious decision that we've made. I don't know if every company, I feel like everyone is at the crossroads, but from talking to people, I know that not everybody is jumping to making those decisions. I mean, a business is continuing as usual in a lot of the firms. Other places have started to adapt, some of these tools, and now you have a combination of tools that they have internally and externally that use AI. So the interfaces start to look a little bit different, but not exactly, because they've not dropped the ball. They're not rebuilding everything from scratch. So the few questions I have, given that context, is: do you have to take a completely 180-degree different approach to building software, given everything that's happening? Or, which is how we are trying to approach things as a company, but that doesn't mean that's the right answer. Or
Yeah.
do you sort of continue doing how you've done in the past, using muscle memory, and then where you find repetition, where you find bottlenecks, you then look to AI to see how you can make improvements, are both organically and incrementally, but not take like drastic steps and saying, I'm going to build software very differently, like completely differently from how I've
Mhm.
done in the past? What do you think? Where do you think companies should fall under, like, if these are two ends of a spectrum?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, well, so at BODHI AI, our three pillars that we offer are AI training for executives and teams, AI strategy for building out what the future of your work is going to look like, and AI custom AI agents or agentic workflows. And my argument would be you need to reevaluate the entire process of how work gets done, not just software development. We could use software development as an example. In the past, maybe you were literally having to code everything, and you'd have to go search Google for your documentation, and then you'd have to build out your planning and scaffolding, and then you'd have to go actually write the code and document and leave all your notes, and then move on to the debugging process and testing. Well, now instead, your workflow could easily look vastly different by integrating LLMs into that workflow. You could go to chat gpt 4.0 and you could search for existing documentation on what's the cutting edge, or at least relevant to what you're working on. You could then head over to Gemini for all of your planning and scaffolding to take the output from ChatGPT and plug that right into Gemini. You could then go over to Claude and ask it to generate all the code that's relevant for the documentation and structure that you just established. And then lastly, you can bring all that over to Cursor and it can crank everything out, edit, test, and debug it for you. And now instead of having to do a vast majority of the manual labor, manual digital labor, the AI systems are doing 75, 80, maybe even 90% of that work for you. And you're fine tuning and adjusting all the outputs as they come along. And that applies to every department, in my opinion, when it comes to knowledge work. So same for sales, same for marketing, same for HR, same for accounting and finance. It's learning the ins and outs of how these systems can tackle that larger portion, the 70 to 80% of your work, so that then you can just refine and tweak the outputs and move on from there. Applies to executives as well, right? Just because you're having to navigate different situations and think around strategies or whatnot doesn't mean that AI can't help you there as well. And so the way I like to break it down is what I call the trifurcation of work. And this was featured in a recent Forbes article. But the idea is there's three levels that AI is now going to be able to help you kind of organize in your workflows. And a lot of people tend to think it's either AI does it or a human does it, but there's definitely a middle layer as well. So real quick, like if you want, I can outline kind of the trifurcation.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
so you want to look at your workflows, you want to look at what your teams are doing, and you want to see what are the highly repeatable or automated tasks or data heavy tasks that AI could do. So that first layer is like AI only, pure automation. It can handle that stuff, minimal observation. 99.999% of the time it's going to crank out an optimal output. The second layer is a human in the loop or AI hybrid approach, where perhaps the AI does vast majority of the work, and then a human just double checks it. In a customer service scenario, AI could answer FAQ questions all day, but then as soon as a customer wants a refund, maybe you have a person just validate that refund is in fact should be delivered. And then the last piece of trifurcation, the third level, is human only, right? So making sure that there's certain elements of your business where perhaps you do not want AI involved, whether that be for security or it just doesn't do a good job in those areas, or you have a service you want to offer that requires a human to human interaction. Those are the components of the trifurcation that I think if you can reconfigure your workflows around, you'll be able to hit the ground running as an organization, and you can apply that to literally every department across the board, whether it's software engineers or salespeople.
You broke that down beautifully. Let me add one more thing to that, if you will.
Yeah.
Let's say when we start building, let's take an example of an API that we build. We we've been reasonably traditional so far in the way we approach the solving of this problem, which is let's say starting with business or product management. The product managers, so up until now, have not actually written code per se, right? They do everything that product management brings to the table.
Mm-hmm.
When we build the next API, one of the things that I was thinking about the other day with the team, Zach, is even that activity has to be quite different from how it has been in the past. In other words, you're identifying a business problem and you want to build an API to say solve that business problem. But the way the exchange of information, or the deliverable, if you will, what the product manager, the team of product managers would create, the product team, and give it to the dev team, is going to have to change quite a bit, I reckon. It's not like, hey, they do whatever it is that they've done in the past quite the same way, and then they pass it along to the dev team, and we then use AI and AI tools to actually build this quicker, faster, and whatnot. Not necessarily, right? Even when you're creating these requirements, talking to business, or doing your research, coming up with whatever documentation you are coming up with as a product team, that team also needs to be quite well aware of AI and AI tools. So by the time it comes to the dev team, that deliverable looks dramatically different from how it might have actually looked in the past. I mean, would you agree, exactly like this? I'm just taking an example of every team or every person in the company reacting to these changes, and not just the dev team necessarily reacting to these changes.
Absolutely. It's I would almost say, product development people are almost best suited to tackle a lot of these new AI tools and bring them into their daily workflows, because if you did not code and if you did not understand programming languages in the past as a product development person, you relied on your software teams, and there was this like push and pull back and forth of iteration just to get something to look the right way, let alone function the right way. And now all that's almost completely gone, right? Because a product development person can hop into Lovable, or they can hop into Cursor, or they can hop into Replit, or they can hop into Bolt and tell it what they want to see in terms of like a user interface on the front end, and even suggest some of the back end integrations and whip up a code base that can then be handed over to the team to work from. And all of the user functionality and all of the preliminary minimum viable product elements can be kind of sussed out at the very front, so that whole time span of back and forth in early development phases can now be crunched down to a matter of hours instead of months. That's not to say, like I'm a big proponent of vibe coding, and I love what you can do with it. But at some point, you do have to draw a line where you hand things over to actual developers to bring things into a production ready environment, to secure things, to harden whatever it is you're rolling out to the public, because there can be very serious ramifications if you don't take those steps, for example.
Those that is a very important point. Let's talk a little bit about that. It's one thing to use these, as a team where we find better ways of doing what we've done in the past. Here's one of the challenges we find ourselves, situations we find ourselves in, and tell me if that resonates with you, Zach, and I want to get your thoughts on it. You want to rely on these tools, and sometimes we find ourselves thinking, what, I feel like I should be doing this work, but I don't want to do it because that actually feels inefficient these days. So even if I don't know how the tool might do it, I'm pretty certain that there is a better way of doing it without me having to do any of this, right? Let's say we go with that as a premise. I'm starting to do some work, and I tell myself, Krish, you know what? Don't do it. Probably there is a tool, there's a model that can do this for you. So just don't even waste time thinking. So now you spend time or cycles and energy finding this, and maybe you find a tool that does it. Uh, but here's the part where I'm still unsure is how do you, and this is me asking as a developer, problem solving, agnostic to coding, right? To me, they're mutually exclusive, right? Sometimes you can be a fantastic developer, but not a great problem solver. Other times you could be a mediocre or an ordinary developer, but a great problem solver. And sometimes if you have both, like somebody who's a great developer and can solve problems very well, then you have a beautiful combination. And what I mean by that is if you just had these tools and had them generate code and whatnot without understanding the fundamentals of computing per se, while on paper it seems like, hey, you don't need to hire a developer or you don't need to hire as many developers, point taken. But you mentioned ramifications. Is it possible, like today, or do you see it 6 months down the road or 12 months down the road? Do you see a scenario where you're a team with few developers and many other people playing different roles in this company? Do you see a scenario, Zach, in the near future where there aren't any developers in the team, but there is a piece of software that is being built, tested, deployed, and maintained without any developer in the team, like a traditional developer?
I do think we'll get there at some point, but I think I was watching a podcast the other day where somebody was calling out, the early days of using Copilot, and they would complain that the software that Copilot cranked out, the programming that Copilot cranked out, was just as buggy as any intern developed programming, and that's because it was trained on GitHub and it was trained on a bunch of entry level programmers' writing capabilities, and so it learned all the bad habits and all of the poorly programmed elements of how to write code. But all of that's being addressed now with these newer tools. It's not perfect yet, but the understanding of why that initially happened, how to address it, and then how to develop newer products that are improved is now a part of that development life cycle for all these companies chasing after these goals. So I do think at some point we'll get there, where a system can fully understand the data structures and algorithms and logical maintainable code best practices, adhere to those in everything that it does, limit code bloat, limit placeholders, and all the other kind of garbage you see getting pumped into these systems now, and just give you exactly what you want, what you need, and it's secure, it's safe. I don't have like an exact timeline for that. I think it could be anywhere between 2 years and 5 years. It really kind of depends on who kind of gets the right recipe for all this, but it's definitely coming. And you can see that echoing through other iterations in the workplace as well, I think, with other jobs or other areas that have been slowly refined over the years and now completely handed off to the machines.
So, in other words, programming has begun to become a sort of a commodity, if you will, right? In other
Yeah,
words, 5 years ago, you couldn't do things without developers in a team, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. How much of it you can get done without developers, or how many developers you need to get the same thing done, might be subject to variation, right? Depends on the team, the problems, and whatnot. But I think it's fair to say that you can make progress without your team being staffed with developers. You mentioned prototyping. I'm thinking the whole approach to prototyping is going to change dramatically. How we prototyped in the past is probably not going to be how we're going to do it in future. And then also sort of vetting what you're doing, it's going to be done in much smaller iterations than perhaps it was done in the past. You're not working for like 6 weeks or 8 weeks coming up with something to figure out if this makes sense or not. Perhaps you're only doing it for 6 hours or 8 hours, and then you actually have something already that you can socialize with someone else. Now,
exactly.
I do not disagree with any of that. I truly believe that as a developer or as somebody even running a startup. But here's where I find the disconnect. Now, like both of us, we are located in the US. I'll just speak to us as a country. We are probably the most advanced, or I should say, one of the most advanced nations. I think we are leading the world in terms of, in many aspects, certainly in AI. probably I want to, from what I'm reading, closely followed by China, for instance, and then
Mhm.
maybe there's other companies are probably a little further behind. Given that, right? Given that as context, when I go to the store to buy something, or maybe it's food or groceries or whatnot, or even to the nursery to buy some flowers and plants the other day, I don't see the impact of, from a tech engineering world. We talk Nvidia, we talk AMD, we talk, CoreWeave, we talk all these companies. Nvidia released their earnings 2 days ago, and a lot of things are happening and moving quickly. But I feel like when I step out of the engineering world and the mindset and sort of go to the real world out there, the pace at which things are changing does not necessarily seem like it's anywhere close to how we as folks in the industry believe, or for right or wrong reasons. Things are changing fairly quickly. But when I go to these stores, I see systems that are pretty dated, uh, sites that were built probably 10 years ago by people who use tools from 20 years ago, so it looks very, very dated. One of the stores I go to is Micro Center. I don't know if you have one in Minneapolis, but
Yep.
they are few and far between. But I was talking to somebody the other day, not too long ago. They still use the DOS based systems. Like they
The
don't.
green
I asked,
screen. Yeah.
yeah, it was a kid that was working on it. And I'm like, maybe a college student or somebody. And I'm like, do you understand how this works? They're like, "Yep, I have no idea. We are trained to using this that you cannot even use a mouse, right? You have to
Mhm.
use tabs and your keyboard." So what I'm trying to say by that is, Zach, is there a disconnect between how we perceive things as changing? Now, they are changing. It's fast enough. Development is changing. All of these things that we talked about make sense. But it's one thing to sort of see all of that happen in the lower environments. I just want to know how much of this has shown up in production per se, not
Yeah.
just for companies like Meta and Alphabet and Microsoft and Apple, right? Even Apple might be lagging behind, as I'm understanding, in some of these things. But for these large companies, they've made a lot of advancements. Has that really translated? I have a second question, but has that really translated to the real world? Like when you go out there and going about your business of doing things outside of your work and your company, do you see that you're sort of far ahead of the curve,
Hmm.
or do you think everything else is catching up as well?
Yeah. No, that's great. I have to adjust my ear pods because I'm smiling so much. You're
Right,
nailing all these questions that
right.
are super relevant, I think, to the workplace today, for things both for employers and employees to be thinking about. You know, not to do too much of a shameless plug, but I do have an upcoming book called Turning on Machines. And it's about the rise, the revolt, and the reverence of AI, and how AI is going to change the way we work, the way we learn, and the way we love. And there's this unique thing. If you look back through history at all the major step changes in human evolution and innovation, the dawn of stone tools, the use of fire, agriculture, the printing press, industrial revolution, all of these things were exponential changes at the time, but every one of them had a different window of time for how long it took humanity to raise that technology up, revolt against it in a lot of ways, to harden that technology and ensure that it actually fit our societal needs, and then have a reverence for it and actually elevate that technology so that we could then elevate ourselves. And what's unique about the digital world is that that exponential change can happen at the speed of light, whereas if you take one step removed to just hardware, right, it's already 18 months behind where the software could be, because it takes that long to produce a chipset or a server rack or whatever it may be. That delay is what you're talking about, and the more antiquated the technology is, and the more entrenched those businesses are in their vertical or in their space, the longer it's going to take that step change to have an impact on those businesses, I think. So that's part of the reason why maybe we're feeling like every 2 months there's a new video generation tool that's amazing and looks completely real now. But you go out to the computer store or the guitar center and you see the green screens still being used out in the marketplace, because it's going to take time. In the robotic space is a good example, right? Like, part of the challenge of launching a successful robot company is the production timelines and the amount of money it takes to then scale your production and secure your systems and then integrate all the software. And by the way, every time you change the software, you got to update the firmware, which means you probably have to take a look at the hardware, which means you probably have to take a look at the security, right? So there's like all these knock-on effects to bringing things from the digital world to the real world that it just takes time. And so,
You know,
yeah, I think there'll be a unique window here where if you can tap into the velocity of digital transformation and digital evolution in an exponential era, you can probably get a little bit of a head start over the more tangible hardware focused elements of creation.
Zach, you
Yeah.
you articulated that beautifully. I just want to restate that in my own words, but I'm just
Yeah.
going to shamelessly copy what you said. I'm not necessarily going to be adding any value to what you said there, because you said it beautifully. What you're saying there, correct me if I'm wrong, is uh, things take time. By time, what I mean here is how each company, each industry adapts to it. Each organization, or each country, or each continent, or each state, or however you do it, everyone's going to be adapting or sort of learning this at different paces, if you will, right? Not everybody's going to move along at the same pace, but the journey has sort of begun, right? Some people are moving really quickly towards this. Other companies are sort of digesting what's going on, and some others may have not even gotten started here. But it sounds like it's fair to say that everybody's acknowledged that things cannot potentially be the same. Because when I talk to developers, even good ones, really good developers, there is this defense mechanism. Maybe it's a human trait. You're like, AI could come after other jobs, but what I'm doing is so difficult and so complex that I have to be pretty in a safe position. And I never believed that ever, with or without AI. Because I always, if you're a fair, decent developer, I want to believe I'm a decent developer, even if not a great one. You always believe when you're writing code that you could be
Mm-hmm.
doing that better,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
You just know that, hey, I don't know how to do this better, so I'm going to do
Yeah.
the best I can. But never once in my 20-year career have I ever thought that what I've done or what I was doing was the best way to do it. I always thought this is the best way I'm capable of doing it till
Right.
I learned better. But I know it can be done better. That curiosity and inquisitiveness has to be there. Otherwise, you couldn't be doing things. You cannot progress in society, right? No matter what you do.
Yeah.
And when we build soft, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, look at graphic designers, right? How many times in the past decade did people say AI will never do art? AI will never be creative. And then all of a sudden, Runway comes out, ChatGPT comes out with its, iterative DALL-E 3, for example, and all of a sudden, beautiful, images are being rendered, photorealistic images are being rendered, and all the graphic designers are holding their hat saying, like, what do I do now? Translators, another good example, where they would say, oh, well, I'm a highly paid, fluent, and nuanced translator, and the conversations that I'm helping businesses with have so many different unique elements that need to be understood. And now they're just validating what ChatGPT translated for those people, and the nuance is still there. It's being handled flawlessly by the systems. Those are the types of things. It's like the 7 degrees of self denial, right? Of like, nothing could ever do what I do, because and then, well, I guess it could do it, but not as good as I do it. And then, oh, it looks like I can do it, and I just have to give it a few tweaks and adjustments, and then
And then finally accepting that, oh my God, it's actually doing it a whole lot better than I could have ever done, for instance.
right.
An example I can think of is, let's say we take the iPhone. And let's say if calculator was human,
Mm.
if a camera were to be human, I'm trying to see if I could draw a parallel here. Hopefully, we'll see how it goes with my analogy. If calculator had a heart or emotions, it would be like, you know what? I'm dealing with numbers. Nobody else can do it, and I need to exist till the end of time.
Mm-hmm.
iPhone comes, you don't need calculators anymore. Same thing with phone camera, right? I mean, you can
Yep.
have these big fat, zoom lens and everything if you want the Canon and the Nikons, but for 90% of the world, when you're traveling, you don't need that anymore. You're just taking your iPhone and you're good to go. So if
Yep.
camera were human in the past, it would have almost been a denial saying, nope, an iPhone couldn't take my job away, but it was
Yeah.
gone. And the number of devices the iPhone's gotten rid of, and by virtue of iPhone, other smartphones as well, is countless, right? There's so many things we would have had in the. I mean, I was watching Cheers not too long ago. You know, the thing from
Yeah.
20 years ago. I love Cheers, and I think Norman brings a camera in one of the episodes, and I was trying to show it to my son. My son's like, "What is this thing?" It was this huge. Norman's carrying the huge camera into the bar, and he was like, "Oh my god, that's a camera? That doesn't make any sense. Why was it that big? Right? It doesn't exist anymore." To me, this is an inflection point, if you will,
Yeah.
for humans, right? What
Yeah.
iPhone did to a lot of the devices, AI is doing to a lot of the jobs and roles that are out there, right? Like, let's say I'm a calculator. I'm now in denial, saying I need to exist till I come to terms with the phone getting rid of me or my needs, for instance. Is that a decent? First of all, I have a question that follows this, Zach, but I
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
get your thoughts. Is that a stupid example, or you think it's a decent enough
No, I think
example
it's
for me?
perfect analogy, right? Of what happened in the hardware world, and you could even say the same for companies. Every company that backed, the camera, look at what happened to Kodak. Every company that backed the calculator, look at what happened to. Well, I guess Texas Instruments is still around to some degree, but it's those types of same elements that definitely apply here, and I think we're definitely kidding ourselves if we go out and tell everybody it's going to be fine. AI is not going to take everybody's job. It is going to take jobs, but those who adopt AI and figure out how to work with AI are going to be the ones left managing, the AI systems for the time being. And that's what I try to help companies understand in my line of work is the people you have are the most valuable resource of your organization. They're loyal, they understand what you're doing, they understand why you're doing it in most cases. Now you have the world's most powerful intelligence at their fingertips. If you are to deploy an automation and drop their workload to the point where you think you need to lay off a bunch of people to save on money, that's an antiquated way of thinking about it. Instead, think about the amount of leverage you now have to maximize every person that's loyal to you, every team member that's on your company payroll, to take on new challenges, to take on new objectives, to tap into new customers, new markets, new products, new services, whatever it may be. Everybody now has the ability to explore those avenues, and it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience and a little bit of iteration to work through all that. But the companies that figure out that hack are the ones who are going to run circles, I think, around all the others that are chopping people left and right and trying to get by with the bare minimum of what they think is viable. And we're even seeing some examples of this in the marketplace. Klarna is a good one that said, we're going to get rid of all of our call center staff and just have AI handle our calls. And now they're quickly realizing they should probably hire some call center staff. And that kind of speaks to that trifurcation idea that there is going to be a layer there where there's only a human that can solve that, at least for the time being. So you should probably think about how you're going to address those areas differently, for sure.
But what should the approach be here, Zach? I go back to something that Musk had said a while. Again,
Mm.
you can like him, you can hate him. It's left to you as a person. But there are I believe like everyone. Bias has no place in engineering, right? As engineers, we try our best not to be biased to a language, to a framework, or to people. Not like we are perfect. Nobody's perfect, but I just say this because people have emotions triggered when you say names these days. To me, Elon Musk is a person who's inspiring in many ways. I might get some flack for this. But I'm talking from an engineering standpoint, right?
Yeah.
If in my lifetime somebody is going to put humans in Mars, I believe Musk has to be one of those people. I
Mm-hmm.
truly actually believe that. Now, one of the things he said, given that context, and I forget your personal opinions about Musk, folks who are watching or listening. One of the things he said was, if trying to over engineer, I'm going to paraphrase what I think he had said a while ago. When you work with engineers, I know there's a broad range of people, and I say developers because that's who I am, and I take examples, but it's good for any other person in the team as well. You have a person who tries to get everything ironed out, meaning all ducks have to align before they write that first line of code, because they're like, you know what, I could be doing it wrong. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like me who actually 10 minutes into a topic or a conversation I want that to be reflected in code, whether it was AI generated or not over the years. It still needs to be reflected because to me, that's the source of truth. That's binary. That's what the machine understands. I can sit here, talk all day long for like 4 hours, nothing gets done that can be executable. That can be executed, for instance, right? In that context, I think what Musk had said, if I remember correctly, was you don't need to get everything done perfectly, meaning you have to go back and change things frequently enough. If you don't find
Hmm.
yourself going back frequently enough to fixing things that are broken, that means you're probably not doing things efficiently. Now, he may have
Right.
said this very differently, but that was my takeaway from what I heard or what I read there. In the context of AI, I want to ask you this. Do we become sloppy is not the right word, but I'm going to use that regardless. Rather than wait to make learn everything, there's a lot of LLMs, there's a lot of different options, and it's growing every time you go there. There's a new tool, there's a new company, there's a new way of doing things. It can get pretty overwhelming. So how do you recommend we go about this as a company? In other words, let's say I have a team, uh, we're building a next API. We have a problem, a business problem in mind. We want to go about solving that problem. How we approach that has to change 180 degrees, right from how we engage the team, who's going to be involved in getting that done, what roles are going to be left with, we're going to be left with, and who may or may not be in the team, and all of those things are subject to change.
Yep.
How do we sort of go and say, you know what, Krish, here's how you should get started. Given all of these AI tools, I don't know how you did that in the past. It may or may not make sense anymore. Do it very, very differently from ground up. Is that a way to go? Or should we sort of do it mostly how we've done it, and where we find bottlenecks, take small stabs at bringing AI into the mix, because these are very radically different approaches. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's not just us. A lot of people are like sometimes unsure. Should I completely approach this as a new problem, or should I keep doing the way I've done it but make incremental changes? Is that a right
Yeah.
answer here, Zach?
Um, no, I don't think there is a right answer, but I think that's the beauty of the era that we're entering into. So just like technology has the capability to grow and exponentially, I think we're entering an era of exponential learning, basically, both for the AI systems and for humanity. And the number one thing I tell businesses, individuals is just start trying it, just start learning, start flexing those cobwebs out of your brain and start messing around with these new tools and systems because you're going to run into shiny object syndrome once you get a taste. A lot of the blue collar and manufacturing companies I work with have never even touched an LLM yet. Once they try it out, then they start wondering, well, how do I build a custom GPT? And then once they build a custom GPT, they're like, well, how do I get this GPT to talk to that GPT? And they start learning about webhooks and APIs. And all of a sudden, they're at this whole new technical level that they didn't even think was possible. And that's where, to your point, your team, your focus should be on what are the tools that are relevant for what we're trying to do now. um, what, how can we learn how to adapt those tools and automate some of our workflows in the development process? Because once you get in that mindset of thinking about workflows and looking at your entire organization and everything you're doing from a workflow perspective, then you start thinking in terms of like, okay, now how do we automate that? If that's something we've done more than twice, we should probably automate that. And that's the learning journey that everybody that wants to grow with AI and go on this exponential learning journey should be messing around with, because you could go out and you could learn N8N. You could go out, you could learn make.com or relevance AI or Gumloop or there's a plethora of no code, low code tools that people can now try, and they all have different user interfaces and they all have cool features that everybody tries to figure out. I'd say don't worry about which one you pick. Just pick one and go with it, because your brain's going to start learning this new kind of format of more efficient workflows, more efficient work with AI. And as the models improve, as things get better, you look at things like Operator or Manus, where they just take over your desktop and just do stuff for you, right? Like those will continue to improve and get better. But if you can get yourself in that mindset and I'm speaking from experience here. Like I have a background in talent acquisition and training and development. I have not written lines of code in my past, but now I've got this kind of AI mindset. Um, we will see people rebel against this for sure. And there's definitely pushback against AI. And there should be, right? That's how you improve systems. I had a boss who would say, steel sharpens steel. If you're just cutting through everything, no problem, you're not improving yourself in any way. So we need that pushback. And I think we'll see that over the coming years as more and more individuals feel the negative impacts of AI. They're going to rebel. They're going to revolt, and that's just kind of the way things are going to be. But that's going to teach us lessons in and of itself that we should learn from too. So hopefully that answers kind of your question of this idea of like, get into that continuous learning mindset so that you can grow with this technology rather than like we said at the beginning, work with it, not for it.
Everything you've said obviously makes sense, but it's also very interesting because you packed a lot of information in there, to be very honest with you. So people have to sort of pause and watch it and hear what you're saying multiple times to digest the breadth of what you're trying to say here, because there's a number of beautiful things you've said. I know we are at the top of the hour here. Do you have some? I have a couple of more things to ask you. It just depends on. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, and let me know when you have to wrap up, and I'm more than happy to, because there are some things I want to ask you given everything you've said so far. Uh, I want to ask the geopolitical impact, if you will. And I'm asking this typically in the past, Zach, I've just, as a developer, as somebody who's running a software company, you're not trying to be worried about any of these things.
Yeah.
But with AI in the mix, I feel like you cannot be, agnostic or oblivious to some of these things that are happening, because it has a direct impact on how we are building software, right? So I want to ask one about, the people, the hiring, and then go to the geopolitical part. You mentioned, everyone in the team has to come up to speed. I mean, no questions asked, right? This is true with or without AI. But how, you mentioned the people are the most important resources a company can have. So you want to, rather than worry about whether you're letting people go or, downsizing, restructuring your teams and then whatnot, try to find better ways of using your resources so they can do things that they have to be doing and not what other tools can help them do. But correct me if I'm wrong, humans, not all, we don't necessarily learn at the same pace or adapt as technology, right? Technology tends to change a whole lot faster than us. We are people, some of us are more eager than others, but it does take that time. So if I said you have a team of people, they're great people, product managers, testers, engineers, salespeople, and whatnot. Let's say you have two options. Now you retrain this entire team to doing things differently, using AI, using these LLMs and technologies that are out there, and then have them do things differently and better. Makes a lot of sense. But for some reason, maybe gray hair or experience tells me that is not necessarily how companies go about doing things. They're like, you know what? There's a new generation of people that's out there, Gen Z or Alpha or whatnot, who are actually learning things for the first time using these technologies. So there is no unlearning there. They're just learning. They don't have to unlearn and relearn, which is a whole lot more complicated than just learning something new. So our company is going to be like, you know what? It's great. Let's just keep Krish as long as, we need sort of here. But rather than train him and have him come up to speed with these other things, maybe we're better off finding this new person who's never done things the old-fashioned way. Which means you don't have to worry about muscle memory and having them unlearn and relearn. If that is the case, I want to get your thoughts before I actually ask my follow-up question there. How do you expect companies to go about with this? Do you think they'll actually believe in retraining, or will they say, you know what, let's just drop the ball, hire a bunch of new people?
It depends on how you align the incentives, right? So you look at Wall Street, the short-term incentives lead to short-term actions, which lead to short-term results. And that's not always necessarily the best course for humanity or the best course for society or the best course for even a business, right? So if your company's incentives align to uh, poor outcomes for the individuals that work at your organization, then yeah, there's a very easy way to abuse this technology to underpay, understaff, undercut the entire element, human element of what you're trying to do as an organization. And I think we will definitely see, if not already, we will see more of that happen, unfortunately. But the companies that get it right are the ones who are going to have a reverence and an understanding that there's a reason you want the gray haired guy standing around being a naysayer, pulling on the loose threads. Whether that's actually moving the project forward or not, like I said earlier, steel sharpens steel. If they have just cause, if they have a justifiable reason for pushing back, there's a reason you should pay attention to that, and that's going to help you get better over time, right? Like, remember in the Karate Kid, I grew up in the
Right.
80s and 90s, like the Mr. Miyagi, training Daniel with all the household chores, and he was like, "I thought you were going to teach me karate," and the whole time he was just cleaning the floors and sweeping the house and painting the fence and all that stuff. But then it turned out at the end, all of those techniques helped him learn the forms that he needed to be effective. And I think there's that element that comes with experience that should not be discounted. Just because somebody's stubborn, that doesn't mean they can't. Number one, it doesn't mean they can't learn these systems. First of all, everybody can learn this stuff. If you know English, you can learn this stuff. But number two, they're going to bring a level of life experience to the table that helps them better understand the business landscape, that helps them better understand what is the ROI we're trying to get out of this project, that helps them better understand the customer base, for example, depending on who your customers are. So I think the more close you can get to that type of experience, the better it'll impact your business, for whatever that's worth.
Makes sense again, right? Let's say we have a web app, which is a project management platform. I'll take an example. We built it a few years ago, before all of this advent of AI. We designed it a certain way, and it's in production right now. Someone asked me the other day, Krish, if you were to do it today, would it be different, or how different? I don't know how different, but my simple immediate answer was it certainly cannot look anything like it does today, because that was not built with these tools in mind, with
Mm-hmm.
the mindset in mind. People who are using ChatGPT and other tools are expecting slightly varied interfaces to when they're using
Mm-hmm.
these platforms. So things have to be built from ground up. Now, the question I have, Zach, for you is, I'm not starting to see these systems that look that different. All of
Mm-hmm.
everything that I'm using on a daily basis, even up until today, looks quite the same. At best, I see some of these interfaces integrate AI, even with Canva. Fantastic
Yeah.
platform. It has AI integration, but it was not built with AI in mind. So, my
Right.
question is, do we have to sort of drop the ball on a lot of these applications, as difficult as it is, and as, I don't know how viable it is, but I'm just asking, it could be a preposterous question. Do we say, as teams and companies, you know what, let's just put these things in maintenance mode because it was built at the time, at a time and place, or however, when AI was not in the mix of things? No matter how much you try to integrate AI into these platforms, it's still going to be like slapping lipstick on a pig, because with Atlassian, a lot of these platforms, with Jira,
Yeah.
you see the AI making its presence. As to how much you like those tools with AI making the presence on the existing platforms that were not built with AI in mind is entirely up to you. I, for
Yeah.
one, don't believe that it should be done like that anymore, but that's not viable for companies to drop what they've done all these years and do it. So what is your take on how you see this pan out?
Have you ever had to port a website or an app from an existing code base to a new code base?
I try not to get, we to keep our lights on, as even as a product company, we do some managed services work, and
Yeah.
those are projects that we try not to get into because it doesn't appeal to us. But the
Yeah.
answer to your
It's a
question
lot of
is
work.
yes, we have done it, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of work, and it's not necessarily entertaining work either. Sometimes
Right.
it's boring work, right? It's brain dead, but you
Right.
got to do that
Right.
regardless.
What? So again, going back to the incentive, right? Of like, if you're porting a website and you have your old website, you have your new website, and you click a button and just route everybody to the new website without having thousands of people try it out. Maybe you had a few testers, maybe you had some QA people go through it and you think it's okay. Once you unleash the masses on that thing, they're going to find all the holes, they're going to find all the bugs, they're going to find all the problems that the 50 or 100 people you put on it couldn't find before. And it's very dangerous to do for the well-being of your company in that fashion. However, if you have a website, that's existing, and then your new website, and you do a soft launch on the new website, and you maybe set up, IP parameters or geofencing so that only certain groups and audiences get pushed to that new site. You test, you iterate, you improve while the existing site stays up. You have a much more sustainable experience. You don't disrupt any of your existing customers because they're just getting what they're used to anyways. And for those that do get to the new site, they're pleasantly surprised with some of the new features, some of the new elements. And as time goes on, you get better and better at improving that existing site. Eventually you can shut down the old one. And I look at AI systems very similarly. There's a ton of legacy architecture out there in the world that will need to get updated. What a lot of companies are doing as a quick fix right now is just slapping a chatbot or slapping an AI logo or system on top of what there is already out there without really changing the underlying elements, as you said. The smarter thing to do would be to create a whole new AI first platform and provide, beta testers and early access individuals, perhaps your most loyal customers, chances to try that out, chances to mess around and play with it, fix those bugs, fix those holes, so that eventually you can transition your customers to that new platform or to that new web page or to that new experience. Yeah.
Great. No, very valid points. Before I go to my geopolitical type of questions, one thing I want to just summarize our conversation so far, and correct me
Yeah.
if I missed something. Based on everything you've shared with us, Zac, fantastic and phenomenal points. It sounds to me that it reiterates my initial thought process, which is if you're building software today, you will need to approach that completely differently from how you may have done it even 6 months or to a year ago. If you find aspects of what you're doing that resonates with you because you've done it the same way, a similar way in the past, it is a problem. I mean, is it fair to say that we should be doing things very differently going forward when it comes to software development?
Yeah, absolutely. You must unlearn what you have learned, right?
In every aspect of it. And
Yep.
then the second part of that question, just to summarize, is as we unlearn and relearn, or just do it, learn it the right way if you're Gen Z or Alpha to begin with, because you're entering the workforce. Should AI be somewhere sitting sort of next to you where it helps you do things, or should AI be at the forefront of what you're doing? Meaning, every single thing that you do, you have to ask yourself this question, which is, hey, can I be doing this with AI help, with AI
Mhm.
tools, with AI technologies, with AI support?
Yeah.
What should that approach be?
I don't know what's going to work for everybody, but for me, what works is if I run into a situation where I've never done something before, usually I look to AI for guidance on getting an idea of what I should do. Uh, if I'm running into something that I've done 100,000 times, usually I'll ask AI to validate what I just did, right? And so it's your back and forth kind of on exploring new areas and retreading well-worn pathways so that you can really make sure that you're on this path to continual improvement. And it's not easy. For a lot of people, it's not fun. It takes work. A lot of systems, you got to build something out before you even get going with it. But once it gets going, you create this pretty cool flywheel effect that allows you to move at a whole new velocity. I've not to toot my own horn, but I went from a zero business to now a $500,000 valuation, with the clients and the projects that I've set up just in a span of 6 months. And I don't say that as a flex. I say that as like, if I can do this from scratch, literally anybody can do this. I truly believe that that's possible. And it's just this idea of like, how do you get those flywheels going, and how do you use AI as your thought partner for sure. Yeah.
Phenomenal, right? Uh, First, as we'll wrap up in the next 15 minutes, I promise the things I want to get to in that time frame is uh, outsourcing came
Mm,
after people were worried years ago. They gave, oh my God, is my job going to be outsourced? Starting with the
yeah.
NBC sitcom, which is quite funny, probably didn't come at the right time. I highly recommend to people who haven't watched it. If they find it, it's called Outsource from like 15 years ago. It's quite funny actually, where this guy who was working in Kansas City is shipped to India because all the jobs were outsourced. For instance, in that particular series, people were worried about jobs being outsourced.
Hmm.
And next, people were worried about immigration, immigrants and jobs being taken over by them. And now, it's AI. Is AI
Hmm.
coming after my job, or is it a combination of all of these things? Now, the question I have, Zach, is from sort of get leading into my subsequent geopolitical question. Is outsourcing going to become less important? I mean, if you had to outsource because you had to save money to build software, uh, because it was more expensive to build it in the US. Now, with
Yeah.
AI making those things possible and cheaper, do you see that have an impact on outsourcing, like the need for outsourcing, and how do you see that pan out?
Yeah, I'm seeing that in my business. I'm seeing that in the companies I work for and work with. Um, if translation is no longer an issue, right? I don't know if you just watched last week. Google I/O highlighted a demo of a real time translation in Google Meet, where the person's talking in English and the other person's talking in Spanish, and it's just translating back and forth fluently, no problem. Like, think about the amount of friction that reduces with the idea or prospect of outsourcing work to overseas lower cost labor. So now you kind of have this whole new factor of outsourcing labor to overseas cheaper places to develop or build things, and AI taking on a lot of the monotonous and data heavy or repeatable work. Now you're kind of getting like hit from all sides with how the labor market in the U.S. or any other established country is having to rethink and retool how they're going to do things. And that's, again, going back to my comment of where you need to get ready to be an exponential learner. If you're unwilling to learn, you're probably going to be unemployable uh, to a certain degree. And I don't think that that's the case with most people. I think a lot of people get a lot out of the learning experience once they get into it. Um, I'm kind of talking at like a high level here. I know this is pretty abstract. Um, I think from a actual like job perspective, though, what I've been sharing with folks is, because I get a lot of people who ask me like, well, what should I tell my kids to go study or learn, right? Because all this is changing so quickly. And I think there's going to be elements around care, for example. Like, there's human to human contact is a very real thing that people need in different situations, and it needs to be safe in certain situations. So, whether that's becoming a surgeon or a dentist or a nurse practitioner or senior care or child care, there's a whole world there to explore of job opportunities to help future proof your career if you're getting into the marketplace. There's going to be legal elements of work that are going to be untouchable because, whether I like it or not, I need to get a certified electrician to sign off on whatever I wire up in my house,
Right.
for example, or whatnot. And so there's going to be certain jobs that are uh, quote unquote safe for the time being, and robots aren't going to be able to do everything right away, and it's going to take them time to scale to, even when they do start doing human labor. So again, exploring the trades and exploring opportunities where, if I'm going to go buy a custom made Viking sword, I'm probably going to want to get it from a guy in Norway that has learned the old Viking sword craftsmanship ways and can, smelt the iron and fire it in a stove and do it all himself. I'm probably not going to go after the, cheap robot production one, for example. And it's finding unique elements like that I think could help people on that journey of self exploration, because at some point, maybe it's 20 years from now, maybe it's 30 years from now, AI and robots could conceivably do every human job. What would you do then? Like, what would you want to do, right? And explore that concept. of what would you learn if everything else was taken away and you didn't have to worry about money for work?
Zach, you said that beautifully. I think it's not a question of if anymore. Six even a year ago, there was skepticism around investment in AI, and even like I remember in one of the earnings calls, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet, had to tell that the risk of investing in AI. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but here was the essence, right? He says that the risk for Alphabet at the time was higher in not making those investments, capex investments in AI, as opposed to making those investments. So they would rather overinvest than underinvest because the risk was higher, which has been the case with all of those companies. Because every single time when they reported earnings, it's funny because as somebody who's running a company as an engineer, I we do you do invest at a personal level in companies and stocks and securities and whatnot, but I never found the urge or the need to tie what was happening to decisions that we were making at work, right?
Mm-hmm.
uh, but that has not been the case in the last 6 months to a year or even a bit more. I've actually taken time to spend in the stock market, uh, partly for investing, yes, but also to understand what the heck is happening so we are able to build better software that is more context sensitive to what's happening out there in the real world. And I
Right.
don't know if it makes sense, but I would recommend to people, if it makes sense in that, to anyone who it does make sense too. For me, it's been helpful, just
Mm-hmm.
taking time to sort of see what's happening in the stock market full time, not part time, for a little bit of time, and listening to these conference calls to some extent, right? Even if not the
Yeah.
entire call, has actually been fascinating. And I went to a World Economy Summit with my team member about 3 weeks ago in DC. It was organized by Semaphore, a fantastic news organization. I highly recommend people checking them out. They brought like 200 Fortune 500 CEOs to talk for like 20 minutes about
Yeah.
tariffs and AI. And that was 3 days of, we stopped doing whatever it was we were doing at work for 3 days and went there to enjoy and experience that. It was phenomenal. And one of the questions that they were asked, Zach, repeatedly was, okay, we understand you're investing in AI. What kind of investments are you making? And all of those questions, which were asked previously as well. But the one question that was new, and the answers therefore were newer as well, because the questions themselves, I didn't hear them being asked last year, was, what is your return on investment on all of your AI investments? The same question that when it was asked last year, Zach, I can tell you from my experience, was there was not too much certainty around
Mm-hmm.
those responses. This year, though, quite different. They were able to come up with actual numbers saying, hey, you know what? This is the ROI we are seeing on our investments. And we don't see that slow down. And every time an NVIDIA has an earnings release, everyone has been skeptical. Oh, are
Right.
they going to blow this out of the park this time? They did it the last time or the last time ago. Even 2 days ago, I think the numbers are pretty good. Of course, they
Mm-hmm.
had some impact with tariffs and whatnot, and the usual things that are happening. But their numbers were pretty good, which tells
Yeah.
me, as somebody who doesn't work there but who's impacted by decisions that are made there, is they are the largest AI company. And if they're able to sell more and more and more and more, it means the world wants more and more and more and more. So
Well, not the world, AI.
AI, right?
Right.
And, exactly. But I want to get your thoughts, Zach, on, uh, to anybody who still has that skepticism.
Mm.
Oh, you know what? AI is hype, or oh, are these investments going to continue, or
Yeah.
things are going to come to a standstill where Nvidia is not going to report profits, probably, or anything like that. That's in the downside of what AI might be. Are there some things you could tell people that will kind of alleviate their, not concerns, but their skepticism, if you will, and make them
Yeah.
believe that, you know what, this is here to stay?
The when it comes to learning AI or AI systems, the worst case scenario is that you are better informed, right? The worst case scenario is that you go out, you spend a few hours learning about Chat GPT, and all of a sudden, maybe it's not for you. That's okay. But at least you know what's there, you know what it can do. But it doesn't have to all be work, Krish. Like honestly, uh, I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-month-old. And every weekend when we go to swimming lessons, I've created a custom GPT that acts as Spidey and his amazing friend's computer from the Disney show. And we talk to Webster, the Spidey helper, and we learn all the cool Spider-Man fun facts and things like that. And that's something that I couldn't have done even 6 months ago or 7 months ago. I made a song for my wife using AI for her birthday. Like there's all sorts of fun elements to AI. I've made a children's book with AI. It doesn't all have to be work, and that's like worst case scenarios. You can just play around with this stuff and have fun with it. Best case scenario is all of a sudden you unlock new business strategies, new markets, new customer bases, new ways of communicating, new ways of automating your workflows, where all of a sudden your velocity of business is increasing. You're getting new clients, you're getting new leads, you're closing more clients, you're closing more leads. And you're figuring out that AI can truly be a strategic thought partner just as much as it can be an effective taskmaster. And that's kind of like the table stakes that we're all dealing with. And kind of to bring it to a higher level at the geopolitical level, the AI acceleration is just going to continue. NVIDIA is going to continue to sell more chips because that's what AI wants. We're going to continue to build more power plants because that's what AI wants. We're going to continue to create and open up more avenues to people's data and in company data because that's what AI needs to improve. Chips, data, and power. If you can find a business that supports one of those three areas, you're probably going to be set for the next 30 years because it's going to be taking off exponentially, and there's no stopping it. The real challenge that I think that we're going to all have to play a part in some shape or form is, can we thread the needle as we get closer and closer to these artificial general intelligence or even artificial super intelligence systems? Because when you think about the folks that are involved in the macro geopolitical happenings of the world these days, if you were to walk up to them and say, I'm gonna hand you access to the most intelligent entity that's ever existed in the universe. Oh, by the way, you're racing the people across the ocean in building this thing too. They might get it in 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, who knows, right? How are you going to stop them? Or how are you going to collaborate with them? That's kind of the big question. Those are the things that keep me up at night when I'm like, yeah, great, hyperabundance. That would be awesome if we could get there. We got to get there first. And the only way that I see that truly happening is if more people become a part of the conversation. That's the whole reason I'm writing the book and doing so in the way that I have, where there's actually like self-reflection elements for the reader, because I'm not going to be able to tell you all the answers, and nobody's going to know all the answers. Nobody knows what's going to happen when we hit AGI or ASI. And anybody who does is full of it because you can't see past a singularity, right? But I think it is important for you to inform yourself and have thoughts and have feelings around what that means to you, your family, your work, whatever it may be. Because the more informed people are, I think the better collective decisions we can make in this crazy journey we're all about to go on.
Oh, well said there, right? One of my last questions to you as we wrap up here is Apple, when they had the conference last year, the conference is coming up in a couple of weeks. They talked a lot about AI, and they had an example of Siri where it did some phenomenal things, and they had an ad in which they had to pull out because it never ended up doing it. It still does not do it, right? So I love Apple as a company. A lot of us do, right? But they have sort of lagged behind there. They're catching up. I didn't expect Apple to have the Chat GPT app on the iPhone and work with Gemini to have AI support. As a software company, I would have never seen Apple not doing those things themselves and relying on other people as partners, which tells me that maybe they'd made some decisions which may or may not have been the right decisions. Who knows? But that's just my opinion, right? Apple as an example. Google has been dominating the search world. Sorry, I'm going to say this and I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Google's dominating the search world, has been dominating it. And now this Perplexity and a lot of these other companies are coming there. And Apple's been in talks with Perplexity, as I read. There's this threat of Google and Google's search, where most of Google's money is coming from, right? Are they going to be relevant anymore from a search standpoint? So these big, massive, monstrous companies seem to be under threat. And you alluded to it earlier, where you said smaller companies like Perplexity was a much, much smaller organization. They're still private. So there's threat to these large companies. That's one part of my question. Uh, but let me finish that there and get your thoughts on which is there a new world order coming of some sort? In other words, companies that we thought were the biggest, bestest ones may actually not be that important because there are new big companies going to be coming up in
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. No. Well, so like, I'll show. I got my 5-year Apple reward there with Tim Cook's signature on it. I've had a Macintosh computer since the '80s. Like I'm Apple fanboy through and through. And the one thing that I'll say is that yes, they are falling behind, but never count Apple out, right? Like
You don't
we've
want to bet
learned time.
against them.
You
Certainly
don't ever
not.
want to bet against Apple for sure, because what they're cooking up, I think, will probably have new impacts at a level we haven't experienced before. That being said, instead of a new world order, I would think of it as a new world balance. If all goes well, right? Um, for the longest time, throughout the industrial era, we've seen kind of capitalism like push people into or companies into monopolies and into this kind of new era of corporatocracy where massive corporations have huge swaths of power. And what that's doing though is kind of like sucking power and money out of local economies and local focus. And if all goes well with these AI tools and AI processes and people can pick them up, you can suddenly, like using Perplexity as an example, you could suddenly have $100 million company valued in a matter of months with a team of 15 or 20 people. Think about how much that could impact the local economies that are now adapting and adopting these tools. Think about how much that could bring out of the coffers of the big tech players or the big energy players or whatever it may be, and create new opportunities for those entrepreneurs that are willing to dive in and learn how to use this stuff. So I think uh, if it went well, in my opinion, we would have a new world balance where there would be a lot more egalitarianism. There would be a lot more capability for the individual to elevate themselves to a global stage. But that doesn't preclude the opportunity for a new world order, which could definitely happen if these tools fall into the wrong hands or are leveraged by the wrong hands, to the point where you have mass surveillance, you have mass intrusion to privacy, or the eradication of privacy for that matter. There's very real elements to all this that I think people should think about and learn about. But again, the more informed you are, the better you can be a part of the dialogue, rather than just standing by the sidelines and waiting for everybody else to figure it out for you.
Just to add to that, what you said there with Apple was you never want to bet against Apple. Or here's why. One more reason, not that we need more reasons, is they have 2 billion plus devices out there, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
iPhones and iPads, and people across the globe are using it. I think Apple's just one beautiful AI feature away from making that profound difference. That feature
Yep.
has not been coming so far. Maybe it's not the Gen emoji, it's not the image playground, it's not necessarily one of those things, but I think I couldn't agree more. To anyone who's a skeptic, I would say they're just that one beautiful feature away from making that impact that nobody else can potentially even think about making. This is
Yep.
amazing, Zach. Everything you've said is it is going to take me multiple listens and watches so I don't miss the essence of what you've captured there. I couldn't be more thankful and grateful to you for sharing your thoughts and opinions on this topic, which is, I believe, we're still in the early stages, right? It's still
Yep.
very early in the game, and the next 2, 5, 10 years or 20 years are going to be profoundly different from the previous 20. I mean, there's no question. I think in that sense,
Hopefully for the better.
hopefully for the better. I have one non-technical question to ask of you, which
Sure.
I do with all of my guests. But before I do that, do you have any questions for me? I know I've been just asking questions. It's easy to do. Here's your opportunity if you want to ask me anything.
I'm curious, if there's any like overarching message you're trying to get out of this podcast, or any like kind of core element or mission that you're trying to elevate with this conversation?
That's a great question. Uh, Here's what I'm hoping to do. We are a software company, right? We build software. That's what we do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
But we started this podcast a few years ago to share our experience of building software, right? Things, issues we run into, challenges we run into. We sort of document that and tell people, hey, here's how we solve that engineering problem. That's how we started the podcast. But we started collaborating with people about a year, maybe a little over a year ago, because people are like, hey, I want to share my experience with your audience as well. And that's been phenomenal for me personally and professionally, because I get the opportunity to learn from wonderful people such as yourself here for an hour and a half, and have that be propagated to our audience. With the AI series, if you will, I'm trying to sort of educate myself first, my team next, and hopefully by virtue of that, the rest of the people are watching and listening to this, which is, how do you build software differently? Because I've been
Sure.
convinced for a while that you have to approach the problem very differently. But every time I go talk to people, whether it's a product manager or a developer or anybody else in a team, I still feel like people are using AI, but the way they approach the solving of that problem has not changed seismically. And that, I think,
No.
is going to have to change. However you brought this bottle of water from the table to your mouth, is cannot be the way you've done it in the past, because things are changing so quickly. If you
Mm-hmm.
do it the way you've done it in the past, it's simply wrong, right? It's simply going to be inefficient. And I mean, not just inefficient. I think inefficiency is all right if you have more money and a lot of people, because you can hide inefficiency. But the problem is, you're going to do it simply wrong. You're just not going to do it right. And as I talk to more people, I understand that people, you know, do not understand the magnitude of what's happening
Yeah.
and the tools as much as sometimes they might even believe. Going to AWS and using, say, Bedrock, and picking an LLM that makes the most sense for solving the problem that you want to solve is phenomenally challenging, right? Every time I go there,
Mm-hmm.
try to find it, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I'm doing this right. I mean, I want to
Yeah.
do it again. I would want to do it again. And I feel like everyone is sort of in the same position. So the whole overarching goal is for myself to become less ignorant about everything that's happening out there. And as a side byproduct of that, anybody else watching or listening to this is learning from someone like Zac Engler, right? Hey, you know what? Well, you know what? Here's how I've been building software, but maybe that's not the right way to do it anymore. Listening to this conversation, watching this guest, I know that I have to do things differently. Now, how
Yep.
differently does that need to be in the context of the problem that I'm solving? That is, it's up to everyone to figure that out, right? It cannot be, it cannot be,
Yeah.
it's not available on a silver platter. But at least the hope is, by having these conversations, people pick up on these tools. You mentioned a few tools, not everything that
Mm-hmm.
I've used. As I was going through the conversation, you mentioned Bold, you mentioned Lovable, Cursor. As a developer, some of us have checked that out and seeing how we could make things better. So the idea is to collectively educate myself, my team, and by virtue of that, anybody else who's watching this, right? That's the hope, at least. It's not to say that
Good.
I would arrive at all of these answers, but just leave people a bit more curious about, oh, you know what? I did not know about this tool. I did not know about this approach. I did not
Right.
know about this company. Let me educate myself a bit more. And the less ignorant you become, the less fearful you're going to be. It's natural, right? The more you know,
Couldn't have
the
said it
less
better.
you don't fear things. And as long as all that I tell people is, excuse me, as long as you're not building software like you did in 2023, I think you're in
Yeah.
good shape. But
Yep.
if you catch yourself doing things exactly the same way you did 2 years ago or 18 months ago, that could be a problem, right? That could be a problem.
I
Uh,
wholeheartedly agree. Well, and I hate to cut things short here, but I do have to head to
oh no, that's it. This is
pick up the kids. But
sorry.
what did you
The
have
last
a
question I had
last
for you.
question?
Last question was, what is your favorite food? That's it.
Oh, oh, sushi, hands down. Can't go wrong with a good plate of sushi. Love. I've been to Japan multiple times. Luckily, thankfully, and it's just one of those things that you get a really good plate of sushi and it just can change your day.
Perfect. And I'm going to end there. So, folks, again, thank you so much, Zach. We talked to Zac Engler, who's an AI consultant, speaker, and founder of BODHI AI, where he helps businesses integrate AI agents. We're going to include the link to Zach's company and LinkedIn profile here. Zach, thank you so much for taking time to educate me on a number of things I honestly did not know before talking to you. Much appreciate your time here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, as I dive deeper into actually creating training programs for software developers specifically, would love to perhaps even get a chance to come back and talk about what that looks like in 6 months, because I think it'll be different than it is right now, even then.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zach. Talk to you soon. Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye bye.